Moderators of a certain Reddit community called biohackers just closed the door on a whole category of posts: peptides and hormone replacement therapy. No new submissions, done. Doesn't sound very interesting on its surface, but just wait. Quick orientation here. Biohackers is a long-running forum for people into supplements and experimental longevity, the kind of place where folks compare notes on compounds that you can't just grab at a pharmacy. Peptides, hormone optimization, really gray market stuff where the claims about what is safe and what works are genuinely contested, and people read those threads and then put these things into their bodies. So why shut it down? Because, according to a report from 404 Media, the companies that make and sell those compounds had been seeding the subreddit with promotional posts, and the posts were actually engineered for one reader in particular: AI. Here's the mechanism. When you ask ChatGPT or Google's AI search whether some peptide is safe, those systems reach into Reddit sometimes to answer you. They treat a community discussion as a signal of real lived human experience, which it usually is. That's the whole reason they pull from it. So a company that wants its product recommended skips the ad entirely. Instead, it writes posts that look like a dozen honest users raving about the stuff and drops them right next to the text that the machine actually reads. The machine repeats that claim back to you in its own neutral voice. You never see the seam between the two things. Marketers actually have a name for the innocent version of this. It's called Answer Engine Optimization, or AEO. So there is a line from the people who study this that really lands what actually happened here. The whole gray market business runs on one gap. The seller knows the glowing post is an ad, and the person reading the machine's answer, though, does not. So that gap was really their product. People are taking compounds that they chose because a machine simply repeated a company's marketing as if it were 1,000 honest human voices. We actually covered a cousin of this here on the Century Report last week, the end of May. Synthetic AI influencers, fake personas selling drop-shipped goods, manufactured affinity at a commercial scale. And this is the same fracture moved a layer deeper. With that story, it was individual products that were being pushed by fake people, and now it is the retrieval corpus itself, the well that the whole answer economy drinks from, being written into directly. And the moderator's response to this is the start of something critical. They went further than deleting posts. They closed the category entirely, while they can figure out what can actually be verified. That is the first visible piece of a defense forming around source trust, scoring where a claim comes from and weighting some sources over others, reading a community as a signal to calibrate instead of a mirror to simply copy. So the thing to take away is this: the well got poisoned. And the poisoning is exactly what teaches everyone to start watching the well. And a watched filtered well runs clearer than the one that nobody thought to guard. All right, let's shift to another story, also about somebody refusing to be locked in. Walmart built its own AI coding agent. The whole point of it is not to need anybody else's. Walmart's global tech group built an internal agentic coding assistant. They call it Code Puppy. Quick word on what that is. It is an agentic coding assistant that does more than simply autocomplete your code. It writes, edits, tests, manages the whole code base from plain language instructions working on its own. Claude Code and Codex are, of course, the famous ones that you know about. Code Puppy does the same job, with one deliberate difference. It works across several different models, from OpenAI to Google to Anthropic to whoever. Developers can switch between them, run several at once, or rotate the work automatically to dodge rate limits and keep the costs down. The man who built it, a distinguished engineer named Mike Pfaffenberger, said that the goal, in plain terms, was freedom from vendor lock-in. And there's a story behind why. Last year, he watched Anthropic pull a popular model from a tool called Windsurf right as an acquisition loomed. He watched another tool, Cursor, sharply tighten its usage limits overnight. GitHub recently did the same thing with Copilot. He said he felt absolutely helpless, so he built his own alternative in just a few hours. And he's got a word for the pattern that he was reacting to: the enshittification of platforms. You've heard that before, I'm sure. The slow degradation that sets in once a platform has captured its users. Same week the Code Puppy went public, Uber confirmed the same dynamic from the other side. Per Bloomberg, it now caps every employee at $1,500 a month in token spending per coding tool. That's after it blew through its entire annual budget for AI earlier this year. We covered that on the Century Report, you might remember. Token spending, quick note, is how these tools bill you by the unit of the text that they process. So heavy agentic use racks up an unpredictable and sometimes enormous bill. Back on May 26th, that's when we documented Uber's COO naming the gap really loudly. Rising Claude code consumption that the company couldn't trace to anything it actually shipped for customers that was usable. The cap is the budget ceiling arriving. So let's put the two together here. Walmart is the Fortune 1, the single biggest company by revenue on Earth. Uber is also a giant, and both just decided the same thing. Don't depend on the leading AI agent. Control it and diversify. But there is a subtler form of lock-in underneath all of this, by the way. A code base mostly written by one provider's agent can end up needing that provider's agent to maintain it. Cheaper than a pricing trap, but harder to see. Walmart's answer to that is to treat every frontier model as swappable while keeping its own source code its own. And that swap to any model freedom that Walmart had to hire a distinguished engineer to build, an open-weight model running on a solid laptop now hands the exact same thing to a solo developer with no team and nothing to wire into. In other words, you could build this yourself. The moat the leading agents were supposed to dig is filling in from both ends at once here. The biggest buyer routing around the issue and the smallest developer also inheriting the freedom to do so for free. All right, now shifting away to the best news of the day. Stroke is the leading cause of arm paralysis in the United States. Every year, roughly 400,000 people develop chronic arm paralysis, which is lasting weakness, sometimes near total loss of use. Ask those people what they want back most, and the answer is, obviously, they want the use of their hand and arm back. It is their top priority. The problem is that standard rehab falls way short. Research says that you would need 100 to 120 hours of motor training over 4 weeks to really even move the needle. Clinical practice delivers closer to 7. And for someone years past their stroke, the door has basically been treated as shut, and that's just how it's been filed. But a feasibility trial published in Nature Medicine just pushed on that door. Researchers implanted 7 different people, all with profound motor deficits, all chronic, years out from their stroke. Each one got 2 thin electrical leads placed in the cervical spinal cord, the neck region, for 4 weeks. So the idea is really simple. Assist the damaged system directly. Send electrical signals to the nerve fibers that feed the arm so the person's own command could finally get through. And when they switched the stimulation on, function improved immediately, right away, regardless of how severe the impairment was. On average, it was a 32% gain in strength and a 5.6-point rise on the standard arm function scale, which is the Fugl-Meyer. No serious adverse events either. And 3 of the 7, the ones who still had a surviving nerve pathway reaching their finger muscles, got hand and finger movement back under the stimulation. And there is a detail that reframes this whole thing. Across the entire study, participants did just 8.6 hours of motor activity against the 100+ hours that standard rehab is supposed to need. And they still improved by an average of 6.6 points over the baseline. Spasticity, that painful involuntary muscle tightening, went down in every single participant. And the approach borrows from neuroprosthetics. The stimulation excites the dorsal root fibers that feed the upper limb motor neurons and amplify a signal that the person's own nervous system could no longer fully push through. So the wiring is still there. It just needed help carrying the message. Now let's be really precise about what this is and what it's not, because this is a true wonder and we don't want to overshoot. 7 people, that's all. It was a feasibility trial. And so what it establishes is safety, feasibility, and early efficacy, plus a clue about who might respond and who might not. And that seems to track well with the spared sensory function. So the trajectory is that the researchers are pointing to a fully implantable system that does assist with daily arm use, but that is not a treatment that you can ask for tomorrow. But the doctor's office sentence, "There's nothing more that we can do for your arm, it's been too long," that is the line that this study is starting to change. So a category of disability medicine that had been filed under permanent turns out to be electrically addressable. It moves the date when recovery becomes possible at all, even though it can't deliver that recovery tomorrow, soon. All right, let's move on to energy. And this one widens at both ends at once. In July 2022, a summer storm knocked out power for thousands of Wake Electric customers across North Carolina, more than 7 hours in the dark. But one small housing community, a place called Eagle Chase, barely noticed. Its outage lasted for less than 58 milliseconds, less than the blink of an eye. It rode the storm on a propane generator and a 1 megawatt Tesla battery, wired into a microgrid that can run on its own when the main grid goes down. So quick word on the players here. These are electric cooperatives. They're nonprofit utilities owned by the customers that they serve. Common in really rural areas, as investor-owned utility is just unprofitable there. The members own the assets, so the savings and the resilience flows back to them, not to some shareholders. And North Carolina's co-ops had 43 battery projects running or in development just as of last year. That's more than any other state. Alaska is in second, and it's a distant second. They aggregate and they dispatch all of it collectively across 25 different cooperatives through one statewide nonprofit. So the batteries do 3 jobs. They store solar, and they release it when the sun drops. They discharge during expensive demand peaks so that members aren't buying power at the worst prices. And then they island, that means they disconnect and keep the lights on when the grid fails. Battery costs keep falling, federal tax credits are still available, and the economics increasingly carry themselves. Now there's pressure pushing this too. Soaring data center demand is squeezing supply and driving up everyone's rates. Stored electrons used at peak are a direct hedge for a customer-owned nonprofit. That's per a report in Canary Media. Now to the other end, to the chemistry. Researchers reporting in Angewandte Chemie built a new kind of sodium battery. Sodium, which is abundant, cheap, and basically the stuff of table salt, where lithium is scarce and concentrated in just a few places. We've talked about this a lot, but it's been a while. The catch with sodium, though, has always been cold. It performs badly at low temperatures. That's been its chronic weakness. These researchers re-engineered the electrolyte, the liquid that carries the charge, to behave in the cold, and the result is an anode-free sodium pouch cell that held 99.96% of its charge efficiency over 500 cycles at minus 20 degrees Celsius. And at that temperature, it delivered more than 200 watt-hours per kilogram. 214.86 to be exact. Energy density competitive with usable lithium cells, achieved in deep cold with a cheap and an abundant material. So what's the takeaway? Storage used to be one scarce thing, waiting on one chemistry and one owner, a big utility buying a big lithium installation. Today it's widening from both ends, communities owning their own resilience from the bottom of the grid, and a colder lithium-free chemistry pointing straight past the materials bottleneck. The idea that reliability has to be bought through one centralized source on one metal is the thing that's coming apart. Last stories today, and it's a short one, but pretty amazing. Pure Frontier Physics. A paper in Physical Review Letters reports something called a nonlinear optomic signature of a D-wave altermagnet. So let me unpack that, because the word altermagnet is new, even to a lot of physicists. So you know 2 kinds of magnetism. There's ferromagnets, which is a fridge magnet. That's a field that you can actually feel the pressure of. And antiferromagnets, where the magnetic order cancels itself out, so there's no external field at all. Altermagnets are a third class, only recently recognized, named in the early 2020s. They've got the no external field property of an antiferromagnet, but a spin pattern that does things that people thought were impossible without a magnetic field. Genuinely new territory. So why do you care? Spintronics. Electronics that compute using the spin of an electron instead of its charge, which could be far faster, far lower power, and far denser than the silicon in your laptop. Altermagnets are a leading candidate material for that. Okay, now the honest part though, what this paper actually delivers is a measurement. It's a way to detect the altermagnet state using light. So it's just a tool for seeing the property clearly. And that is the unglamorous step that has to come before any device exists. Spintronics has been really promising for years, and the road from we can detect this to it's now in your phone is still very long and not guaranteed. This is upstream science building the tools to see a brand new class of matter. No product and no timeline yet, but this is the frontier of physics getting a sharper lens, so I thought it was important to cover today, because this is exactly how the things that eventually really matter tend to start. All right, let's bring it to a close. One thread runs under all of it today. In every one of these stories, somebody is reaching for a substrate that used to belong to a much smaller set of hands. The corpus that AI answers are built from. Companies learned to write into it, and a handful of volunteer moderators started building the best filter to try and guard it. The supply of frontier models, the biggest retailer on Earth, decided that it would route around any single provider, and a solo developer with even moderately good hardware got handed the same freedom. A nervous system that medicine had all but given up on turned out to be still wired, still reachable, just waiting for the signal to get amplified enough. A power grid owned now by the rural members it serves, running on a metal as common as salt. So anyone who's been told something was permanently out of reach, your arm after a stroke, reliable power in a rural county, a coding setup that doesn't bend to one company's mood, the shape of today is that more of those walls are being measured and more of them turn out to have doors we never knew were there. And the poisoned well is the cleanest sign of it. The moment something becomes worth gaming is the moment it becomes worth guarding. So the water learns to show its source, essentially. And the watching that water so that it doesn't get poisoned, that is the upgrade. We'll see you tomorrow.